Well, welcome back. And Jim had to come off trail for 2 weeks. And so we get an opportunity to have a quick discussion with him and see how things went so far and how things are going to go in the future. So, hey, Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you guys.
Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a very interesting and enlightening time on the trail this past February and into March. I'm recovering from a little injury, but I'm ready to get started again. I'm kind of excited about it.
So, Brian, how do you think we should attack Jim on this one?
Well, I'm kind of at a loss at the moment. I kind of felt for him with the whole injury thing. And
yeah, well, let me tell you how I came off trail. How it would start there. So
yeah, that's a good place. Yeah.
Yeah. So if folks have watched the first video, then they know I was planning on hiking the Appalachian Trail. Most people leave for the Appalachian Trail in late March, early April, like now. But I decided to leave in the middle of or early February, which I had in my head planned on certain things like being colder but there's some unrealized gains that I got out of that I'll mention in a second. But hiked for about 35 days total, and right towards the end, we had a series of really cold days, hiking through some snow. My feet got wet, and then very, very cold. And I just had a series of minor medical things that were getting worse, not better. I had a little bronchitis that I think I caught from somebody that was getting worse, not better. And then I had an infection in my right heel. It wasn't bad, but it was getting worse. I think it came from just the cold and the wet. It wasn't a blister; it was just cracking skin. And I needed to come off trail to get some to have a doctor look at it. They suggested I take a 2-week break, and so I just decided because it was going to be 2 weeks, I'd fly home, which gave me the added advantage of watching my daughter Nina wrestle in the national championships this coming week before I head back to the trail on 1 April. And I'm excited to get back out there. Frankly, and I'm sure you guys can appreciate this, and Chuck will laugh. Being disconnected from the real world for a month and a couple days has been glorious. So I came back, and there was a whole list of headlines that I couldn't even believe. I wouldn't have imagined it. It was funny. I was like, we're friends with people now. We're enemies with other people. Canada is on the Ritz. Russia's our friend now, and I was the whole thing. Do we own Greenland yet? I don't even know. And then I made the mistake of looking at my my retirement account, and I just want to go back out on trail again.
Brian, he literally said, I just want to get back out on the trail. I don't want to be around anybody anymore.
La 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 la.
just the political, maturations of what's going on in the world right now. It's really nice to just be in the woods. The first month went pretty well. It was very, very cold for many of the nights, and very, very cold for many of the days. We had days of snow and sleet and mist rain, and it was exciting in just so many ways.
So just by the numbers, how many days have you been gone, and how far did you make it?
Yeah, so I came off trail right around 300 miles, and I believe it was about my 30th hiking day on trail. So, but I have a couple 0 days in there. And so, if you're looking at like average hiking miles, somewhere between 10 and 15 miles a day. I did a 17-mile day and felt really good, but had a couple zeros as I was trying to figure out my foot. And so I think the average, if you do 300 miles, 30 days, 10 miles a day, somewhere around there.
So when we had our last couple of discussions, there's a couple items we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And one was, had you packed right? You were really concerned about, your packing and making sure you had all the proper equipment. The second thing we talked about was your nutrition and whether or not you thought that was dialed in. And the third thing we talked about was your preparation. So Do you want to hit any of those? How to go?
I can hit preparation first, and I think this is an important one, being that Brian, both of you guys are coaches and well versed in the ways of strength training. one thing I did differently than I think everybody I met on trail was I hired a strength coach several months prior to starting, who put together a very detailed and very challenging strength training preparation program that coach, Chuck, you were able to provide some guidance on as well. That ensured that it addressed some of my weaknesses, but also some of my concerns about injury prevention. I didn't have heel infection on my list of injury worries. Maybe I should have. I had lower back, knees, shoulders, the neck, hips, those sorts of things. And the strength training program was brilliant. I was in zero pain, had no traditional challenges of injury, concerns from what I was most worried about because of that preparation. I saw a lot of other folks really struggling on the trail and quitting, frankly, because of knee pain and shoulder pain and back pain and hip pains, ankle pain, because they just went basically from couch to trail and didn't prep at all. And I think the weight loss I did prior to heading on the trail, as well as the strength training, really put me in a good position to be successful. The heel injury basically came from me not paying enough attention to keeping my feet dry. And it's not that I wasn't paying enough attention. Really, it was just I didn't realize they were as wet as they were. They were cold, and so I didn't realize they were wet and cold. I didn't even feel my feet. They felt like blocks of ice for most of the day. And by the time the day was over, the rain, I had gotten chafing in my heels, which led to this infection. So hindsight being 2020, I should have spent more attention on those really cold days with what my feet were doing. I had the right gear. I had more gear than I needed. I had some emergency gear that I brought with me. It turns out I needed that emergency gear on a couple occasions. We had some extremely brutally cold nights in the low teens with winds in 40 to 50 miles an hour, in an open shelter. And I was able to maintain my body temperature and stay safe. I saw people falling out and getting rescued around me more often than I would have liked. We met a woman on the first day who had to hit the SOS button on her Garmin later that night when she got hypothermic. We saw hypothermic rescues in the Smoky Mountains. The injury that I'll talk about that I participated with in the Smoky Mountains, a physical injury, and then several other physical injuries of people being rescued later on from the rain and hypothermia. So leaving in February is no joke. And I think I was concerned that I had too much gear because I was heavier than what most people think they should hike the Appalachian Trail in. But in hindsight, I'm very pleased with the stuff I brought.
How many people did you run into on the trail, kind of total, as early as it was when you started?
Yeah, not many. I think so. From the start, I went back and forth with maybe 1 to 5 people, that I saw regularly going back and forth with me. Everybody's got trail names, so I know their trail names, right? So we had Money Shot and IKEA and his cat Smokey and they're just all finding Cinnabon and Base Camp, and then my friend Vegas, and we were hiking during the day, either alone or maybe around somebody else, but it felt very lonely in February. And then sometimes we'd end up at a shelter with nobody else there, or one other person there, or it was just a lonely experience in February. Behind us by a month, so we heard that on March 15th. Over 100 people started the trail that day. And I can't even imagine 100 people rolling up into some of these small campgrounds and shelters and trying to figure that out. Like there's only about 5 or 6 places to stay at any one of these shelters. The small ones, maybe the big ones, there's more, but I can't imagine that many people rolling in and it not being just a mess. The other thing is you got to go to the bathroom. The privies are just destroyed when you have 100 people. And so I think there's a lot of nice reasons to start in February, not being around a lot of folks. It's a much cleaner experience. And then one thing I'll tell you, people complain that the Appalachian Trail doesn't have a lot of views in the summertime because it's like a green tunnel, the trees and the greenery around you. In February, there's no green. So there's views everywhere. In fact, the entire 30 days, there wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't like, wow, that's beautiful, or that's beautiful. So, yeah, I think that was an added advantage of starting early, is you could just see everything, which was cool.
So talk to us about your nutrition. How'd that go?
Oh yeah. Frank, I thought my nutrition was dialed in. I'll explain in a second. I will tell you that I thought I was dialed in until I met a guy named Dinty for Dinty Moore beef stew. And if he ever watches this, kudos to him, because he was even more dialed in than me. He was straight up making, pizza with mozzarella and avocado and pepperoni and on a tortilla shell. That it was great. What fantastic meal ideas he had. For me, for breakfast, I did oatmeal and Carnation Instant Breakfast real quickly, and that worked well. Had a cup of coffee and was on the road or on the trail. And then I would have an energy bar, protein bar mid-morning as kind of my second breakfast. For lunch, I would stop shortly, and I'd usually take a burrito shell and either squeeze in a bunch of peanut butter or almond butter, or I'd take a tuna fish and one of those tuna creation bowls that Starkist makes, and I just scoop it into make a burrito out of it, cold burrito, and eat that. I know it doesn't sound that appetizing, and I'm pretty much done with tuna fish, but the calories wise, it was good. And then in the afternoon, this is interesting. So my colleagues with SIS, I'm a big fan of their products for endurance athletes. Have been for many years. They make good stuff, and I had not tried their protein bars or their just energy bars. And so in talking with the SIS folks, I was able to get some to try out on the trail. Brother, I got to tell you, those lemon bars from SIS are quite possibly the best tasting bars I've ever had. I had to be careful not to put 2 or 3 in my pocket because I would eat them all. So, and I want to space it out. So I would have usually in the afternoon, I'd have a single SIS bar or something, a snack. And then I wouldn't eat anything until dinner, and I'd have a big 800 calorie, rehydrated meal for dinner. And then a cup of tea and went to bed probably with the sunset. So, in February, the sun set at like 6 o'clock. So I was in bed at 6, shivering a little bit, and then would wake up at 5 and start it over again.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned to me before, and I don't think people really kind of grasp this. I mean, you're in North and South Carolina.
Yeah. There's not much out there,
but how cold did it get? I mean, we had talked about, you having to really kind of sleep on your water to ensure that it didn't freeze or whatever.
For the 30 days that I was out there, the nighttime temps dropped below freezing almost 20 of the days. And then the daytime temps were below freezing probably half of those days, all day. And so, and the reason is it might not have been that cold, say in Asheville, or in the city in Atlanta, but you got to remember that you're at 4,000 feet or above, and in the Smoky Mountains you're at 5,000 feet and above, and you lose about 3 degrees per 1,000 feet. So if you're at 5,000 feet and at sea level it's 40 degrees, and at 5,000 feet, that's 5,000 feet, 5 times 3 is 15. So now you're at 35 degrees. And the wind's blowing because you're at a high altitude, that the jet stream sort of dips down over the Appalachians. So if you get up there, that wind blows at 30, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour sometimes regularly. It can be very brutally cold, and it was. And so the way you combat it is by not getting wet. When you hike during the day, you have to hike a little bit cold so you don't sweat. Because if you sweat, you're in a lot of trouble. And I had that happen to me one day where my undershirt got really wet, and I had to take it off and put a dry shirt on because that wet then freezes, and you have this like icy frozen shirt on your chest, and that's how people get hypothermic. And so you have to prevent yourself from getting wet. And then as soon as you're done hiking, you got to get out of your clothes, and you get damp clothes, and you got to put on dry clothes, and then get warm really quick. Puffy jacket, puffy pants. I had warm socks. I even had a couple extra hand warmers. The other problem is you can't let certain things freeze. So your water purification device, usually the filter, is so fine that if the water freezes in there, it ruins the filter. So, I had to hike with my water filter in my jacket, and then I have some medication that can't freeze. I have that in the other jacket, and then I have a water bottle that I would move from inside my jacket to outside so I could drink it and back inside. And I'm using electrolytes to keep the water from freezing. And it was pretty. It was pretty something else. And I'll actually be very glad to restart now in April and not have to worry about some of those things.
Yeah, I was in South Carolina for a camp about the time you were suffering miserably at 5,000 feet, and it was cold down there. So I can only imagine how cold it was getting up in the mountains while you were wandering around there.
I remember we were hiking through the Smokies, and so the Smokies, some people take 7 to 9 days to cross the Smoky Mountains. I was trying to make a crossing in 5 days. there's a road that goes through the Smoky Mountains called Newfound Gap, and they close that road for bad weather. And so hikers will typically hike the first section in 3 to 5 days, and then take Newfound Gap, get a break, get a shuttle into Gatlinburg, stay a night in there, up all their food and whatnot, and then head back to the trail and finish in another 3 days. I'll talk about the exciting part of the first part of the Smokies later, but once I got back on trail, we were watching the weather, and 3 days out, they were calling for like teens and 75-mile-an-hour winds. And I'm doing the math in my head of like what like wind chill looks like on day 3. And in my mind, I have two choices. Either I hike fast enough to be out of the Smokies in 2 days, or I better be ready for the most brutal night in the mountains that I've ever spent in the mountains. And so, you're kind of paying attention. I'm paying attention to that. And so I just hiked. That's the day that I hiked the 15 miles one day and 17 the next day, and got out of the Smokies, and was very delighted to get out. I stayed at a hostel that night, and folks that were coming out the next day that I met were just like shell shocked from the cold. It was awesome. They made it through, but it was, pretty rough. The first part of the Smokies, those 3 days that it took me to go from the beginning to Newfound Gap, was some of the most beautiful hiking I've ever done in my entire life. And if anyone ever wants to go looking for a couple days of hiking in the mountains, I'd recommend when it's warmer. Man, the Smoky Mountains are just beautiful, just gorgeous.
So we've kind of alluded to it a couple times. So at any point in time, did your Air Force medical experience and training kick in?
Yeah. So this is a good story, a story of survival and perseverance and friendship and never leaving a person behind kind of mentality that we have. So hikers are, they're an interesting bunch, and a lot of times they're loners, but everybody seems to look out for each other. Even on the trail, like if you're needing something, there's always somebody else, that eventually you'll find that can help you out with that. They call it the trail provides. So on the hiking through the Smokies, a person that I was hiking with was doing very well. On the third day, our plan was to hike up over the highest point on the Appalachian Trail, which is Clingman's Dome, come down the other side, hike all the way to Newfound Gap, and then get picked up by a shuttle that evening and spend the night in Gatlinburg. Coming down on the other side of Clingman's Dome was the most treacherous descent I've done. It was treacherous because there had been quite a bit of snow in the weeks prior that had melted and refrozen 100 times. And so the trail was literally a 6-mile long river of ice. And there was no way to escape it. You couldn't hike off trail because there was ice and branches, and it was everywhere. It was very dangerous. I had crampons. I'd brought the right tool for the job, and was able to hike down fairly safely. But when you're hiking with crampons on steep ice like that, you use muscles that you're not used to, and so it's different than hiking down without crampons. You get tired in different ways. When we had gotten to the bottom of the descent off of that mountain and getting ready for one more climb before getting out, the individual I was hiking with fell. And unfortunately, fortunately enough, I was able to call out, and I heard them and turned around and walked back. I was like, "Oh, let me help you get up." And the individual's like, "I'm not moving anywhere." So I was like, "All right, well, let's take a look." And I pulled my pack off and took their pack off, looked at them. And unfortunately, they had broken their foot. It was clearly dislocated to me. It was off and turned and pointed in the wrong direction. But I think it turns out the end result of that was they had broken bones and a dislocated foot. They weren't going anywhere. And so, I immediately, realized this person's going to have to get rescued. And so I didn't want their foot moving around. They had said they were able to move their toes and could feel their feet. And so I took my their hiking poles and connected them to her the leg and the foot, and used duct tape that I had and duct taped the poles to the foot and made a very nice brace that kept the foot safe. And then I looked at my map and I realized that there was a road just a short bit away. It turns out it was Clingman's Dome Road. I saw it earlier. There was a road that had gone up to the summit that we had crossed, and realized that I was going to have to leave the trail to go find this road. And so I talked with the individual and basically told him I was going to go scope this out. I'll be back, and went over the ridge down the other side and saw the road there, dropped my pack off, went back and carried her over to the road. When we got to the road, we were about to hit the SOS button on this
How
person's
far was the
Garmin.
carry, Jim?
A couple hundred meters. It was like a couple football fields. It was at least maybe 2 football fields. So it was, I don't, miles. It was miles and miles. No, it felt like it was far. I will tell you, I had no problems getting the individual up the climb. Coming down, it was easier to have them scoot back down the ridge, which was not very far at that point. Just a short little ridge slip to get to the road. I felt terrible because they were in so much pain, and there were just trees and branches everywhere. It was just like banging them against all this stuff as they were holding on to me. But it was the only way to get off trail. If we had to do a rescue on trail, it would have been miserable, and it would have been hours. And I felt like if I could get him to the road, we would get this individual off the mountain more quickly. So when we got to the road, we were going to hit the SOS button on the Garmin because we didn't have cell phone reception. And a park ranger was driving down the road out of the blue. Trail provides, and was able to rescue the individual, communicated with the other rangers to have an ambulance waiting at the bottom. We all ended up going to the emergency room where they were able to give this individual the medical care that they needed. And I had to take an extra day to sort of get my head right after that because it was pretty scary and pretty traumatic, and got back on trail. And got back on trail with another hiker that was willing to allow me to sort of hike with them for a couple days, just to kind of be around somebody, for a few days, and that was great. So, what a crazy story, huh? So
Yeah, seriously. Wow.
Right place at the right time, or wrong place at the right time, or whatever the term you want to use.
I was happy that I knew what I needed to do to help this individual out, and it was a combination of spending some time learning about wilderness first aid, but also, just training that we've had over the years about, how to carry somebody, and just some things that made it a lot easier, and just calm under storm. I realized like screaming and yelling and getting upset wasn't going to help anybody. We had to figure it out. I remember I'm not a big fan of scuba diving. However, I remember during certification process, you go down a certain depth and you have to take your mask off, and then they take your mask off and you got to find it and put it back on. It's the purpose. I asked them what the purpose of that dumb, thing was, test was, and the individual was like, you have to remember when you're deep sea diving, there's going to be a depth where you get down so far that if you have an emergency, you can't swim to the surface in enough time to survive. You've got to solve the problem right there, because if you freak out and start swimming to the surface, you'll suffocate eventually and die before you ever get there. And that mentality has sort of, kept me safe in a variety of different things. When I realized, like, if you're too far away for real help to come get you, you got to be sure-footed. You got to be prepared. You've got to be thinking about what's the worst that could happen and how do I prevent that, and in this case, when one of the worst things that could possibly happen happens, in the middle of nowhere on a trail, it was a remain calm moment and figure things out. We did hike with that Garmin I was telling you about. There's a SOS button on the Garmin, and if we had been in the middle of nowhere with no road, we would have hit that SOS button, and I would have probably set up the tent. I would have set up the sleeping bag. I would have put this individual into the sleeping bag inside the tent, made sure they were warm and had some fluids to sip on, and then we would have waited for help. But fortunately, we didn't need that because we were very lucky. But that's by the way, that's a good reason why when you're out hiking, and you're hiking in the wintertime, it's not a terrible idea to bring an emergency bivy sack. If you're really hiking in a remote area, because if you get hurt and you need to spend a night out there waiting for help, could you survive? And with a sleeping bag and a tent, you could survive. Painful, but so anyway.
What kind of time frame are you looking at if you've got to call in somebody for a rescue in a situation as remote as that could be?
Yeah, I mean, I volunteered for El Paso County Mountain Search and Rescue when I lived in Colorado Springs, and I was always amazed at how much time elapses before the search and rescue guys are alerted. And let me give you an example. It's not like there's a delay in anything, but you hit the button. The button goes to a Garmin call center. The Garmin call center then has to figure out where you're at and call the local authorities. The local authorities then have to call, raise it up the chain to call and activate the local search and rescue team. That could take 30 minutes to an hour at least, right? Sometimes, maybe faster, maybe not, but there's some time that you lose there. Then you got to get the volunteer search and rescue team together with the right equipment and the right people, and get them to the trailhead and do a quick briefing on where everyone's going and a safety briefing, and then they got to get to you. And there were places where we were 12 hours. We were a full day's hike in either direction from help, and so you could potentially spend some time waiting for help, and you need to be able to survive during that time, knowing and hoping that help is coming. The worst thing that can happen is getting cold, right? In the winter, that's where bad things happen. And that first person I saw on the trail, she was cold and it was raining, and we asked her if she was okay, and she said she was. And we said, "Do you have any more warm gear you could put on because you're shivering?" And she said she did, and we encouraged her to. And but she was going in a different direction than we were. We heard a couple days later, we were asking about her, and someone said, "Oh yeah, she went hypothermic that night." Made a dumb decision, or made a crazy decision to hike. We had heard she had made a decision to hike away from her camp and down a dirt road, ended up in a abandoned campground, hit the SOS button, but fortunately rangers were able to come get her because of where she wandered it down to. I don't know if that story is all true. That's just the version that was told to me. So if she's watching this and the story is not true, go ahead and correct it. But it just speaks to how when you get hypothermic, you can make bad decisions. And so it's really important that you have a plan to not get hypothermic. And we saw a couple folks that really struggled with that. This February was very, very cold.
So what's the version of your story floating around?
So this is funny. So there's this thing called trail mail. And the stories move up and down the trail faster than you hike the trail. It has to happen because shuttle drivers are talking to each other, and people I honestly, I don't know the science behind how a story can happen in the wilderness in the Smoky Mountains, and 4 days later I get to a hostel and somebody tells me about a story about this guy who rescued this person in the mountains after she fell from a cliff, and he had to carry her a quarter mile or miles to safety. And I was like, and then when I kind of told him what happened, he's like, "Oh, I must have heard a different version of that story." And so, I wrestled a bear, and none of that is true. It was actually not that dramatic. It was really just stay calm, get the foot taken care of, and I will say that this individual was one of the bravest, most pain tolerant people I've ever met. Remained calm the entire time, had their head about them and their wits about them. And that made it a lot easier. If this individual was screaming and had lost it, it would have been very, very difficult. And so, kudos to this individual for also being mentally prepared for an emergency and willing to work with me to get them help. But it was funny that the story had legs as time went on. We heard about it at the hostel in Standing Bear Hostel when we came out of the Smokies. We heard it again in Hot Springs at Elmer's Hostel. It was kind of funny. It's probably still out there. People are talking about that. I wonder if I hear it when I go back to the trail. I'm actually flopping north up to Harper's Ferry. I'm going to skip Virginia and come back to it. I wonder if I'll hear the story up in Harper's Ferry. We'll see.
This would be interesting.
Yeah.
You're going to be 8 feet tall and, still carrying this person, just on your back.
He just kept her on it. Yeah. So let me tell you, one of the profound things that I sort of found out and appreciated. We all operate in our circles, and we're friends, and we communicate with people that are like us. And my circle of influence and people crosses over with Chuck's in a variety of different ways. We're friends, we're colleagues in science and sport, coaches, and then Brian, your circle crosses with Chuck's, and just recently our circles crossed. And you get this crazy Venn diagram of how everybody knows each other. There's people out there whose Venn diagram will never cross over yours under normal circumstances. And they are really interesting people, and they have done some really interesting things. But that Venn diagram will never cross yours, Brian or Chuck, not once in your life. Well, maybe yours, Chuck, just from where you were born and where you grew up. But there's people where those Venn diagrams don't cross. And when I got out on the Appalachian Trail, I started crossing with some of these people's Venn diagrams, and met some fascinating people that, I just wouldn't normally associate with. And they're just amazing people with interesting stories. And I just, a young man who rescued a cat and now this cat, he's taking this cat with him across the Appalachian Trail. Another man who lost the most dear people in his life, and now he's just looking to sort of find a way in the world. And then a couple guys that wanted to help recover, essentially a couple potheads who wanted to spend their summer and winter volunteering their time helping people recover from Hurricane Helene. And so they were just kind of crashing at a local hostel while they did that. These are people that really amazing, really interesting stories. And I think getting a chance to meet them over the first month has been one of the better parts of this experience. Something I'm looking forward to when I get back.
Yeah, it sounds like that's one of those things that that you don't expect necessarily, but is one of the highlights of the entire trip, I would think.
I didn't expect to be so lonely. I was really looking forward to spending some alone time, but after a while you get lonely, and it helps me appreciate like the things I have and the connections I have and the people I want to get back to. I didn't expect it to be so cold. I don't know why. It should have expected that. Mountains in February. I didn't expect I was going to be so cold. I didn't expect to get an injury the way I did. I thought it'd be something else. I was sure it would be my knee or my back. I didn't expect to meet people that I didn't think I would ever meet in my entire life. Essentially homeless people that, are walking the trail just because that's what they have no better thing to do in their world. And that's what they want to do. And when you start talking to them, you realize like, this dude knows more about life than I do, and just fascinating stories. He has better, more well-informed opinions about the economy than I do. It's easy to judge a book by its cover, and I think I've tossed some of that out doing this experience. And then I think the last thing I was reminded, sort of how powerless we are. You go out there and you can hike the Appalachian Trail all you want, but when Mother Nature wants to do something, it's fruitless to try to fight it. You kind of have to sort of figure out how to live with it, whether it's cold or high water or winds or you name it, fire. It was fire danger a couple days. We had forest fires that were getting in our path. And here's a good question for you, Brian. You ever go hiking and you're like, what do I do if a forest starts raging up the mountain at 90 miles an hour? Like, I've never thought about that. Like, I don't know what to do. We learned some things while we were out there.
Oh, I can imagine. I've thought about it on several occasions. I don't have the answer on what you do. Some of the mountain bike rides I take out in Colorado Springs area, they've had some pretty devastating fires, and the ground is still completely, there's no trees, there's just burnt stumps, and you look at that and you go, that had to have moved really quickly.
Yeah.
Well,
I know the answer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You don't go hiking where there's a fire, and you don't go ride your bike where there's a fire.
Yeah. It's easy to say that, right? Until some stupid, lightning bolt starts a fire in the North Carolina wilderness, and next thing you know, it's moving. So one thing, I did learn a few things. Fire moves in every direction. So it's not like you can run away from a fire. Like, it's coming for you every direction. It moves like 10 times faster uphill, and moves faster than the wind pushes it. So if you know the wind speed and the winds are gusting to 70 miles an hour and you are uphill of the fire, you best realize it's going to get to you at like 100 miles an hour. And so your best bet is to be downwind and below a fire, moving away from it. That was the best we could surmise. Without a compass and a map and lots of trails, I don't know how you figure that out. I think the best thing to do is to not hike where there's a fire.
So you got 100 minutes to get the hell out of there.
You better be moving quickly.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's mildly terrifying when you think about it.
See, these are the things you think about when you're all alone.
Well, that was the thing, Brian. That's one thing that Jim and I were talking about. Is he had mentioned that there was a point in time that he's in a location knowing that really there's limited ability to rescue. At least I don't think about being in the mountains of, I'm from West Virginia, and I don't think I've ever been any place in the mountains of West Virginia, which no matter what, it was 12 hours before I could get to civilization.
Yeah. There,
It just doesn't cross my mind.
It is scary. I've done some things like that in the past. I went to Patagonia one time, and when you're in the southern tip of South America, Chuck, you went to Antarctica. Like,
Yeah.
there are places in this world where the risk calculation is, if something happens to me, I need to accept the fact that it might be 24 hours from a hospital. And you're like, well, no, what could happen? Well, you have a heart attack. I mean, if I had a heart attack, and people have had heart attacks on the Appalachian Trail, if I had a heart attack in some of these locations, I think I would lay down and I'd write a note as best I could to my family, because I don't know how I would get rescued. You know what I mean? Like, there's no road, there's miles and miles for anything. That's the scary part. The not scary part is the fact that someone's going to come walking behind me eventually. And I've got the SOS button, and there are people out there that, they volunteer to come rescue. You just got to stay alive. And so you got to have that, willingness to do what it takes to give yourself enough time to get rescued. So I hike with an aspirin. Not really for me, but God forbid I came across somebody who, was having chest pains, you probably give them the aspirin and stay with them until help came. I don't want this to be like people are scared of going hiking and I felt very safe on the Appalachian Trail. I didn't think it was overly scary or but I did feel lonely and remote at times.
No, I mean, I wasn't trying to. I guess the thing where I spent a lot of time studying history and there's that Netflix series that just came out a little while back, American Primeval, and you think about the frontiersman attitude, and you think about the whole idea. I mean, can you imagine that? You show up at Ellis Island, you're given a sheet of paper, and you're told if you go to Utah, you have a piece of land, and you walk there for the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, you're walking. Yeah, you're walking on trails that are
well groomed.
Yeah,
well groomed. I read or listened to almost 20 books while I was on the trail. I like to listen to Audible books. I got into a genre that was fascinating, and it was basically the survival book genre. There have been amazing events in the history of the world where humans have survived or not survived, and done some crazy things. And and listening to those books while I was doing this crazy thing is pretty fascinating. So I'll give you an example. The Indifferent Stars Above, one of my favorite books, is a book about people going westward, and a young woman's decision along the way, good or bad decisions that ended up with her and the Donner Party as they crossed into California. And this is the story of one of the survivors, one of the very, I think, only or few survivors of the worst winter in the history of the mountains of California, and the things that happened on the Donner Party. And if you're not familiar with Donner Pass and the Donner Party, they survived through cannibalism, but this woman survived and lived to tell the story. And so it's fascinating. Like, it's cold out, but at least I don't have to eat my buddy to survive. Like, I've got a freeze-dried meal in the back. And here's another one. If anyone's looking for a great book, and Chuck and Brian, one of the best books I've ever read or listened to, it's called Madhouse at the End of the Earth. And it's the story. If you know anything about explorers, you've heard the names Cook and Amundsen associated with the North Pole and the South Pole over history. What I didn't know is how well those two knew each other, and how they met was a very random event on another explorer's mission to the South Pole that was doomed. And this is the story of how that doomed exploration was how Cook and Amundsen met each other and became very good lifelong friends and explorers. And there's a scene. I'm hiking through the Smoky Mountains, and I'm at 6,000 feet, and I'm cold and I'm tired, and I pull an SIS bar out of my pocket, and I'm nibbling down on it, and I'm like lamenting about, like, this is really harder than I wanted it to be. How what else could they throw at me? And I'm listening to this guy, and they're like, today we were excited because we were able to club a leopard seal to death, and it meant that we had food for a week. And I was like, oh, at least I don't have to club a leopard seal to death, so I have food for the week. Like, I have an SIS bar, it could be worse, And so I kind of enjoyed that genre as I've been hiking, reminding me that I actually have it pretty good. So I'm gonna sleep in a hostel tonight, not in my frozen boat stuck in the ice in the Antarctic.
All right, Jim. So we got about a couple more minutes. I'm going to turn over to Brian if he's got any questions, but then just kind of give us a layout of what's next. So what do you think, Brian?
Yeah, no, I think I think sounds like you've got an epic adventure already. 35 days into it. What's the said you're skipping a section and going to go back to it. And then best of luck to your daughter at nationals. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about Nina all day. She, my son is a fantastic cyclist. Nina sort of passed through a bunch of different sports and found powerlifting a couple years ago, and quickly became the Mississippi State powerlifting champion. And then the next year in a different high school, they started a wrestling team, and she wanted to be she wanted to wrestle, and I'm like, sure, what the heck, it sounds cool. It turns out women's wrestling is one of the fastest growing high school sports in America. Didn't know it. And I don't know a dang thing about wrestling, but I learned, and she got a great coach, just a wonderful coach for this team. And he helped Nina convert that incredible strength that she has into wrestling fitness. And she's been unstoppable all year. And she won the state tournament a couple weeks ago, which qualified her to got her to go to the national championships here in Virginia Beach this week. I'm excited to go visit her. How it relates to my plan. So I have always been more about the journey than the destination. A lot of folks want to thru hike the Appalachian Trail because they want to get to Katahdin in Maine. And I've wanted to thru hike because I wanted experiences along the way. And I wasn't so worried about if I had to skip a little section or if I had, whatever. And so for me, restarting in Harpers Ferry, Virginia on April 1st.
West Virginia.
West Virginia aligns me with what a lot of people do called flip-flopping, which is you hike north from Harpers Ferry, and then you hike south from Harpers Ferry after you finish the north section. I'll do the best I can with the time that I have, and I'm all about making more stories and having more epic adventures. And maybe Chuck and Brian, you'll have me back in a couple months, and I can share the next trove of stories of people that I've met and things that I've done. But it has just been a wonderful adventure. I'm delighted to have built these memories up and have no regrets so far.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the continuing saga. That
beard's getting long too. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's going to be a lot longer in a couple more months. But best of luck. Hopefully the rescues are few and far between,
Zero
as necessary. And sounds like you've approached this very carefully. And I think that's probably one of the big lessons from there is asking yourself what's the worst that could happen and try to prepare for that. That's always a good idea. But it sounds like you're having a great time, and sounds like you're just going to have some incredible stories, and you're going to have to sign the book when you're done with it. So
you guys can come join me if you like. If I didn't make it sound enticing enough already.
I'm a highly pampered track sprinter. Walking more than about to the mailbox is exhausting for me.
Yeah, you got to wheelchair it back.
That's it. Yeah.
No, every time we're at the track, Brian screams at me, "Why are you standing?" I'm like, "Oh shit! Yeah. Okay, I'll sit down."
Love it.
Well, brother, I got nothing.
I look forward to seeing you in person in a couple days after Nina's competition. And then thank you for driving me back to the trail. This is going to be fun. I appreciate Chuck's actually going to take me back and drop me off in Harpers Ferry. And then it's a weird feeling, by the way, Chuck, leaving, because this happened to me a couple times now, where you sort of walk away from the vehicle knowing you're not coming back and realizing you have everything you need to survive, like right here. It's a weird feeling.
And I'm just going to do this.
Yeah, you wave. Yeah, that's exactly right. You just wave.
Perfect.
Well, Jim, thanks for joining us today. And Brian, let's just stick to riding around the track.
Yeah, I think that's a lot easier. As far as I get away from, the farthest point away from my stuff is what, 250, 300 meters, something like that. Even I can walk back to that. So I think we're set.
So Brian, I'll see you in May. So Jim, Brian and I are running a training camp down in Rock Hill, South Carolina at May the 17th, 18th, something like that. I think that's the dates.
Let me see here. 15. 16th, 17th, and 18th.
16th, 17th, and 18th. So Jim, you can do camp next year.
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll be available. Maybe I'll be done. Maybe I won't. I will tell you though that I would love to connect with you guys in person, in real life, at one of your camps. I think it'd be fun to try track sprinting for a once in a lifetime experience.
Well, we certainly know a couple guys, and I would love to sit down for hours and listen to these stories.
Oh yeah, have a couple beers and share.
Oh yeah,
you got it. It's a date. We'll make sure it happens.
Very
Can you
good.
imagine, Brian, at the Pig in Rock Hill?
That's a lot of pernicious IPAs, I think. Yeah.
All right, guys.
I'm in.
Thanks for everything. And Jim, I'll see you in a couple days. Brian, I'll see you next month.
Jim, have fun. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah. See you guys.
See you guys.